"You've read Keats," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her across the small cottage, a duke's daughter in a damp riding habit, rain on the windows, a volume of poetry on the shelf above his head. "Yes," he said carefully. "Is that—" "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't apologize for it." He didn't. "Hello, and welcome to The Lingering Heart. I have been wanting to tell this story for weeks, the particular kind of romance that happens when two people who are supposed to have nothing to say to each other discover they have everything. Today's story is set on a grand Derbyshire estate in 1815, and it is, I think, one of the most quietly thrilling slow burns I've ever had the joy of writing. Lady Arabella Cavendish has been noticing the estate's land steward, Mr. Thomas Holt, for 2 full seasons, and telling herself firmly that this is neither appropriate nor relevant. Thomas has been noticing Lady Arabella and telling himself the same thing. It has been, for both of them, a profoundly unsuccessful exercise. Today, a rainstorm has put them alone in the same small cottage with no one watching and nowhere to be. 2 seasons of careful restraint is about to discover it has its limits. Before we begin, if you're new to The Lingering Heart, welcome. I share romance stories here every week, stories that stay with you, that remind you why love matters. If that sounds like something you'd enjoy, please subscribe so you never miss a tale. And if you're already part of our community, thank you so much for being here. Now, let's begin. The rain arrived without much warning, which was typical of October in Derbyshire. One moment the sky was a troubled gray, and the next it was delivering itself with vigorous conviction across the south fields. Lady Arabella Cavendish, who had ridden out alone that morning against her mother's advice and in defiance of the house party's organized shooting schedule, made it as far as the old gamekeeper's cottage on the western edge of the estate before the rain became genuinely unreasonable. She pushed the door open. She went in. She was not, as it turned out, alone. Thomas Holt looked up from the estate map he'd spread across the cottage's small table. He'd come here to work through a drainage problem on the western field without the interruptions that followed him everywhere in the main house, and stood immediately when he saw who had come in the door. "My lady," he said. The expression on his face was careful, composed, and entirely impossible to read. "Mr. Holt." She was dripping on the flagstone floor. She found, somewhat to her surprise, that she did not want to leave. The rain, of course," he said. "Please, stay." She sat in the chair nearest the small fireplace, which was not lit, and he started it without being asked, which was the kind of thing she'd noticed about Thomas Holt for 2 seasons, the way he attended to things quietly, without ceremony or announcement, as if comfort were simply a matter of practical good sense. She had watched him do this in the house and on the grounds and at the edges of gatherings where he was present but not quite included, and she had thought, every time, that she was watching someone who was thoroughly at home in himself in a way that most of the titled men in her life were not. They maintained, for the first 15 minutes, a perfectly correct silence. He returned to his map. She looked at the fire. The rain threw itself against the single window. There was a small shelf of books on the far wall, left by some long-ago gamekeeper, and she found herself looking at the spines. Wordsworth, Clare, and there, between a volume on field drainage and a guide to game management, Keats. She said nothing about it, but she looked at it for longer than was necessary, and when she looked away, Thomas Holt was not looking at his map. "The drainage issue on the western field," she said. Not because she particularly wanted to discuss drainage, but because the silence was beginning to have a texture she didn't trust. He looked at her, the brief flicker of surprise he didn't entirely suppress. "You know about that? My father mentioned it at dinner, something about the autumn planting." He nodded slowly. "The lower field floods every 3rd year. I've been working on a solution." He hesitated. Then, with the air of someone making a small and deliberate decision, "Would you like to see?" He showed her the map. She was good at maps. Her governess had been unusually progressive, and she asked the kind of questions that made him look at her differently, the specific sharp attention she brought to the problem that he hadn't expected and couldn't help responding to. They worked through the drainage solution together for 20 minutes, which was not at all what either of them had been doing with their morning. When they arrived at an answer, an obvious one once you saw it, she said, "Oh, of course," with a satisfaction that made him smile without meaning to. "You've read Keats," she said. It came out without quite being planned. He was still looking at the map, a pause, long enough to be a decision. Yes, which, the odes mostly, to autumn particularly, though I think Hyperion is underrated. Arabella felt something shift in the architecture of the morning. She had had this opinion, the exact same opinion, for 2 years. She had never said it to anyone, because no one in her social world had read Hyperion with enough care to have an opinion worth arguing with. "It is entirely underrated," she said. Her voice was very steady. Her heart was doing something she declined to examine. They talked about Keats, then about Wordsworth. She preferred him to Thomas, who found Claire more honest about rural life, and she argued this point with an elegance that made him think she had wanted to have this argument with someone for a long time. The rain showed no sign of stopping. At some point, she had forgotten to maintain the particular social posture required when speaking to a man of Thomas Holt's station, and at some point he had forgotten to maintain the careful professional deference required when speaking to Lady Arabella Cavendish, and neither of them noticed until they were already entirely, simply themselves. If this story is capturing your heart the way it's captured mine, a quick like helps others find it too. Now, back to Arabella and Thomas. "You are not what I expected," she said, which was not a sentence she had planned to say aloud. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Outside, the rain was beginning, only beginning, to ease. "What did you expect?" "I don't know," she said honestly. "I've been watching you for 2 seasons, and I've been filling in the spaces with assumptions, the way one does. And now?" She looked at him directly, which was something she had been carefully not doing for approximately 2 hours. "Now I think the assumptions were mostly wrong," she said. "I have been doing the same," Thomas said quietly. He was not looking at the map. He was looking at her with the particular quality of attention she had noticed from across rooms for 2 years, direct, unhurried, as if she were the most interesting problem he'd encountered today, and he intended to understand her properly. Lady Arabella, her name in his voice, said that way, not with the practiced social grace of the men who called on her in drawing rooms, but with a quiet gravity that treated the name as if it were worth something, stopped her breath for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I am aware," he said carefully, "of what I am and what you are, and of every practical, sensible reason why this conversation," he gestured slightly at the space between them, "should not have happened and should perhaps not continue." "Yes," she said again, quietly. "So am I." They looked at each other across the small firelit cottage, the rain soft now on the window, the estate map between them still showing the drainage solution they had worked out together, and both of them knew, with the particular clarity of honesty spoken aloud, that the sensible reasons had already lost. "I don't know how to," she started. "Neither do I," he said, simply, without pretending. He had spent 2 seasons being realistic about exactly this, the impossibility, the impropriety, the difference in their stations that the world would not let them ignore. And now, sitting in a cottage with the woman who had read Hyperion and solved a drainage problem and looked at him like he was exactly who he was rather than what he was, he found that his realism had entirely deserted him. "But I think," he said, "that I would like to try to find out." "My engagement is to be announced this weekend," she said. She did not look away when she said it. He did not look away when he heard it. "I know," he said. "Lord Whitmore." "Yes." Fire crackled. The rain had almost stopped. The morning, which had been straightforward and ordinary an hour ago, had become something that could not be unmade. She stood, slowly, because the moment of standing would be the end of the cottage and the beginning of whatever came after. He stood, too. "Lady Arabella, don't," she said softly. "Don't tell me this was—" "I wasn't going to," he said. "I was going to say, I will find a way, if there is a way to be found." She looked at him for a long moment. "There may not be," she said. "I know," he said. "I'd like to try anyway." She walked to the door. The rain had stopped entirely. The estate lay before her, washed clean and brilliant in the October light, and somewhere in the main house 24 guests were eating luncheon and entirely unaware that anything of consequence had occurred this morning. She paused with her hand on the doorframe. "The Hyperion argument," she said without turning around. "You're right, I've always thought so." She could hear the smile in his voice when he answered. "I know," he said. "You have very expressive opinions for someone who is trying not to have them." She laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, the kind she rarely permitted herself in the spaces her life required her to occupy. Then she stepped out into the October morning. The grass was wet beneath her boots. The house was visible through the trees. The engagement announcement was still 2 days away. 2 days was, she thought, a great deal of time. She had not yet agreed to anything. The Earl of Whitmore, she had realized somewhere between the Keats and the drainage solution, was a man she had agreed to without agreeing at all, had drifted into through family expectation and social gravity and the absence of any particular reason not to. Thomas Holt was a reason not to. The engagement to the Earl of Whitmore was not announced at the Ashford Park house party. The Duke of Ashford received a very composed, very clear, very private letter from his daughter 2 days later, explaining that she had reconsidered. It caused a great deal of discussion in certain circles for approximately 1 season. What followed, for Arabella and Thomas, was not simple or swift. The world did not rearrange itself for the convenience of 2 people who had found each other in a cottage during a rainstorm. There were conversations that were difficult and a year that was complicated, and the particular work of 2 people building something real across a distance the world kept insisting was uncrossable. But the world, it turned out, was not as decisive as it thought it was, and neither Thomas Holt nor Lady Arabella Cavendish had ever been particularly interested in what was considered impossible. Every love story deserves to linger. If Arabella and Thomas stayed with you, if their cottage conversation felt like watching something rare and true, I'd love it if you'd hit that like button. It tells me which stories resonate most deeply. And if you'd like more tales like this, subscribe to The Lingering Heart. New stories arrive every week. Do you believe some love stories are worth keeping secret, even when the world would say they shouldn't exist? Tell us in the comments. Until next time, may your heart linger in love.